time. So get the recording going. All right. So hello everyone. So like I was saying some before class, and I'll just repeat it for people who came in before a little bit later. I had never read all of this all the way through in graduate school. I read the first like 5-10 pages maybe. And it's really the back half is where things take a sudden turn. So I thought this was one of the coolest things I've read like in a really long time. I absolutely love this. We probably aren't going to get through all of it today. We might just try to get some of the really big picture points today. But if people are super interested, I'll do another day next week because this is, I just thought this piece was absolutely crazy. If I had to give you a one sentence version of what Frege is arguing in the thought, it would be that he is using Kant's account of transcendental subjectivity to refute both idealism and materialism and prove Plato's theory of the forms, or at least like a version of Plato's theory of the forms. It is bananas and wonky, and I love it, and I think it's way clearer than Kant and Plato is at arguing Kantian and Platonic conclusions in some ways. Actually, I actually think the way that he presents certain things is way clearer. And Kant and Plato are probably my two favorite dudes. So yeah, that's saying something. So yeah, I'm super into this. We're gonna try to work our way through as much of the big picture stuff today. We're not going to go argument by argument, and we're not going to probably even get all of the big crazy claims that he makes. But my hope is we'll at least get through a bunch of them. The way we're going to read this piece is as basically working out the metaphysical implications of the philosophy of language that we've been talking about the past 2 days. So the parts of Frege that are super influential in early analytic philosophy are what we talked about the last 2 days. The basically the philosophy of language that he's giving. This is a much later essay. This is 1918, I believe, is when he writes this. This is not as influential, but it's super cool. So we're going to enjoy it because it also is going to tie back to a lot of the stuff we've been talking about this semester in some sort of surprising ways. He does some really surprising stuff with Kant in particular, but also some stuff with the German idealists, and even some pragmatist stuff at the end. There's some of the stuff with pragmatics comes into. So yeah, super excited. We'll see how much we can do today. Let's just begin. Actually, does anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts about anything before we actually do just dive into it?
Sorry, I had a question. This was kind of about the last one.
Sure, but still relevant, still very relevant.
Could you maybe explain what he means by like an indirect? Because he said that like a subordinate clause cannot always be replaced by another clause if it has like an indirect reference of words. Can you just explain what an indirect reference of words is?
So what he means there is that basically the meaning that the words in the clause have depends on the dominant clause of the sentence. So here would be an example of one. This is one he uses from last time. So but let me find it for a second because it's a pretty decent example. Yeah, so Napoleon, who recognized the danger to his right flank, himself led the guard to the enemy position. I'll write that up. Let me go to my board to write that up. And so the claim that's made here, so if this clause really works as a sentence on its own, it doesn't have any sort of indirect sense as a result of the remaining sentences. Frege's claim is that you should be able to replace the subordinate clause with any other true proposition without changing the truth value of the sentence as a whole. So the primary clause would be Napoleon himself led the guard to the enemy position. If the subordinate clause is really independent, then you can replace the subordinate clause with any sentence with the same truth value. without changing the truth value of the sentence. And in this case, at least in certain grammatical contexts, that's not going to be true. Because I could replace this with Napoleon, who was of average height for his time, himself led the guard to the enemy position. Fine, it doesn't change anything. But I can't do Napoleon, the capital of the United States is France, himself led the guard to the enemy position. Because the who in this sentence only makes sense in reference to the Napoleon. And so I actually would change the truth value of the sentence as a whole if basically the subject of my sentence in a subordinate clause was not Napoleon. Does that help at all?
Yeah, that was good. Thank you.
Okay. He says it's, and there's some cases where it's even more egregious, because here at least I could replace it with any one that's Napoleon, at least. Like anytime Napoleon is the sentence. There are some where you wouldn't be able to change it at all without changing the meaning of the sentence because of how thoroughly the individual parts of the subordinate clause refer to the primary clauses.
Thank you.
Awesome. Good. Any other starting questions? All right, so let's do some review then. Let's real fast review what we've been doing sort of previously on Frege. So we've got basically a series of distinctions that he draws in the course of doing philosophy of language. And there's one last distinction that we'll add. Yeah, ideas. All right. So a proper name is basically just a conventional linguistic unit, right? So, Napoleon is an example of a proper name, as is whoever first discovered the elliptical orbit of the planets. That also is a proper name. It's a name because it refers to basically some objects, and it's a proper name because it, in effect, fits within the linguistic conventions of the language. So proper names have a sense. Right? You can think of this loosely as a meaning, though, as we're going to see what that actually entails is going to be what we spend a lot of time talking about today. But the sense of a proper name is basically the mode in which it presents something to us. So when I say whoever discovered the elliptical orbit of the planets, right, that picks out the person in the world, Kepler. Kepler is the person who discovered the elliptical orbit of the planets. But when I say whoever discovered the elliptical orbit of the planets and I say the name Kepler, they have different senses. And indeed, I might not know that they refer to the same person. And the way I've sort of been selling this up to this point, at least, is that it's kind of like setting out conditions for the object to be named. So if whoever first discovered the elliptical orbit of the planets, if that name actually refers to something in the world, it will be the person who first discovered the elliptical orbit of the planets. Right? And so that's the sense that that name has, as opposed to the reference of the name. The reference of the proper name is just what object in the world is named by it. And there, Kepler, that name, and whoever discovered the elliptical orbit of the planets, that name, they both pick out the same dude in the world. But you might not know that. That might be a discovery, and it's possible to make that discovery because those names have a different sense to them. Again, just pause for a second. Good so far?
I do have one question, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, according to Frege, are the propositions within ideas impossible to convey with linguistic tools as long as the language that's spoken is not purely logical?
So I might ask you to reframe that question slightly, or maybe not. Maybe what I'm about to say will answer your question.
Okay, yeah.
But ideas do not have propositional content as such.
Okay, so what would propositions be within the thought or the reference?
Yes.
Oh, gotcha.
Or at least propositions are expressions of thoughts.
So is there a truth value to ideas, or there
No,
wouldn't be?
Ideas as such have no truth value, except insofar as they're an expression or something of a thought.
Well, very spicy. Thank you.
That worked. That did indeed help. Okay, perfect. So we were talking. That's not going along with that question. Let's now start talking about sentences. So perfect. We can switch from words to sentences. So a proper sentence is also a conventional linguistic unit, right? It's going to be a unit that expresses a thought. That's sort of the sense of the sentence. And it might have a truth value. Again, it doesn't have to, just like some proper names don't have a truth value, or don't have a reference, like unicorn. Some proper sentences might not have a truth value, like, for example, things that are said on stage during a performance. Right? No one's saying any of that's true. All that's being referred to is the sense and the way in which the sense maybe moves us emotionally, something like that. So the big thing we're going to care about today is what he means by the thought of a sentence, the thought that is expressed by a sentence. So I'll leave that for now. The only thing we know, he says that this is objective. This is sort of the puzzle we ended with last time. He says that this is an objective feature of reality or something. It is not a feature of minds. We've got the reference of the sentence. The reference is the truth value, if any, again, that is expressed by the sentence. So the sentence, what is the sentence, Napoleon marched to the right? What is the reference of that sentence? It is the truth value of the sentence. So it is true that Napoleon marched to the right. That is what the sentence refers to. It basically just refers to truth. Super weird. That means every true sentence has the exact same reference, and every false sentence has the exact same reference. The true ones, the referent is all true. The false ones, it's all false. Which again raises the puzzle. Okay, what does he mean by true and false? So that also seems like a quite puzzling utterance. And then the last thing that we want to add in there are what he calls ideas. These are our internal conscious images, representations, pictures, however we represent thoughts to ourselves. That's an idea. Of either a thought or a sense. So when I say the word apple, whatever pops into your mind, by that is your idea of the apple. Similarly, if I was to say Napoleon marches to the right, again, whatever pops into your head when I say that is your idea of that sentence, of the meaning of the sentence or something. And these are purely subjective. And if they're subjective, they can't be shared with anyone else. That's what we were just Caleb and I were just talking about. They are not things that you can share with another person because they are purely subjective. Our ideas are never the same as anyone else's ideas. Ideas are always only for the person who has the idea. And so we would never want to say they're true or false. Superficially, at least. Superficially, that doesn't really match up how we talk about things as being true or false. We talk about our ideas as being true or false on the assumption that our ideas are corresponding to the world. And that's the claim that's precisely, if he's saying, no, the way I'm reserving this term idea is not referring to something that corresponds to the world. It's referring to the image you form of a sentence in your mind. All right, so that's the review of last time. Again, pause for a second. Any thoughts, questions, comments about any of that? All right, so what this particular piece is about is trying to work out what are the metaphysical implications of these distinctions that he's drawn as his philosophy of language. That's at least one way you could sort of characterize what it is that he's doing here. And he's really straightforward about that. If you read some of the footnotes, if you are following along with the footnotes, there's one point where he just straightforwardly says, my greatest danger is that you're all still going to think I'm talking about language when I'm talking about thoughts, and I'm not. If you think what I mean by a thought is a linguistic unit, you are going to misunderstand me. Okay? So a thought is not a language thing. It's not an idea thing. Okay, what kind of thing is it then? If it's not a language, if it's not a conventional language thing, and it's not, and it's also not an object in the world thing. So what other kind of thing could it be? What are my choices? Same thing with truth. What could truth possibly mean such that every sentence has the same reference, and that reference is true or false? Okay, so that again, that's the framework of what we're going to do. Let's just begin big picture, because like I said, we could go really slow through this. I found some of his arguments here absolutely fascinating, but it'd probably be, at least to start with anyway, let's start biggest of the big pictures. what is his ultimate claim? His claim that he ends with, let's do truth first. Truth is indefinable. There is no way to define what we mean by truth. It does not, and so what doesn't it mean? It does not mean correspondence between mind and world, or language and world. It doesn't mean useful. And it doesn't mean coherence. Does not mean and cannot, not only does it not, it cannot mean any of those things. So that's the first big picture. Second big picture, thoughts are a third thing between, and what are the other two things? Between the external world of objects, or not even between, actually, between just a third thing. They're not, they're not objects in the world or features of our minds. And we can say more about that. So they're not, we can say what they're not. Thoughts are eternal or atemporal. Probably atemporal is actually better. Thoughts are atemporal, not perceivable, unchanging, and and discoverable, not invented. So they're not creations, and they also are not. Oh, also one last one. I see, Caleb, you're vaguely. I can barely see you, so just unmute yourself when the time comes. But one last thing, they also, in addition to these shocking consequences, they're not thought by anyone, or at least they don't have to be. All right. So this is our these are our big picture, crazy, like banana crazy conclusions, right? You should all be flabbergasted by all of this. So let's just stop. I see a couple people like seemingly have some things they would like to say or ask at this point. So let's go ahead. Let's pause, do some questions here, and then we can start breaking down why he's saying all of these things. So let's see. We got a question here. Is truth, if truth isn't definable, does that mean that it's sort of like not real or intelligible in some way? What's the connection between truth and intelligibility? Truth is intelligible. Indeed, you might even just say that it is intelligibility itself, but intelligibility itself cannot be defined. Things would have to be defined in terms of it, rather than it being something subject to definition. So that's one. Weston, go ahead if you got a question.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering as to since thoughts are discoverable, right?
Yes.
Like where are they at? Like yeah. Are they like in some kind of universal alien book or something?
Yep.
Like where are they at?
Where they are not, that question is, so that question is one, entirely natural, and two, wrong, because they're not anywhere.
Yeah.
Because objects can be places. So objects in the world, that should be L there. Right? Objects are places. And they're also times. So objects are both places and times. Things in our mind are times. They're at least a temporal location. Thoughts in and of themselves are neither. So they are nowhere and no when. But we can relate to them at moments of time, or with us standing in particular locations.
And an example of a thought is like the Pythagorean theorem, right?
Yep, an example of a thought would be something like the Pythagorean theorem.
Okay.
That's right. Or the law of universal gravitation.
Okay, so I have a twofer. First one, the truth being indefinable and not being corresponds between mind and world. Is kind of like, isn't postmodernism? Would that kind of feed into the argument of a meta narrative of truth?
No, because the idea of a meta narrative of truth is that that basically is a kind of coherence theory.
Okay.
Where
Gotcha.
basically it's like the coherence of the narrative story or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And nope, that's not true either.
Okay, so he would even argue against some kind of universal, like transcendental metaphysical truth, because that would also be a coherence.
Well, no, he's arguing against any such effort to define truth. So if you define truth, for example, as ideas as they exist in God's mind, no.
Yeah.
Or if you define truth as the meta narrative agreement of a story within another story or whatever, no.
So what's the point of speaking about truth if it's indefinable?
The point of speaking about truth is that it's obviously really, really important to speak about truth.
Yeah, but then if you have a faulty foundation in which your definition of truth isn't possible, so how can you speak from truth about truth when there is no definition?
So to say that it's indefinable doesn't mean that it's actually incoherent. It means that it's the condition for coherence.
God fucking damn it.
Right? So like you can't define it in terms of other things because it's how you define things.
Oh, okay. And that's what you meant by the satisfaction condition?
It's related. Yeah, it's at least related. Yeah.
Okay.
It's basically, it's what it is for something to satisfy the satisfaction condition. But that's not like a definition. That's more just like pointing to something. That's just a gesture.
So here was the second part of the question before I broke off into many questions.
Okay.
What's the distinction between truth and thoughts? Or is it that thoughts cannot be true?
It is that thoughts can be true or false.
Okay, gotcha.
And thoughts have different, if you want to put it this way, thoughts are, they don't even have, they are different senses.
Okay, I'm with it now. Thank you. Sorry. I've been actually thinking about this for like the past 2 days. So
those are both good questions. We got another one in the chat. Doesn't this reject pragmatism? Yes. Yes, this is really against pragmatism. Yes, that's entirely right. Yeah, this is really not coherent with pragmatism at all. And I imagine James would be horrified by everything that Frege is doing here. So, and Frege would think that James is like destroying science, destroying the possibility of science. Yeah. All right, good. Any other sort of initial questions? All right. Oh yeah, we have another one. Actually, a couple more in the chat. So someone's asking, would the I not exist on this account? The I does exist. Okay, so we have to, what the word, it depends on what you, so the question is, does the I exist on this account? That's the question. It's a really good question. Again, I'm going to have to give what's going to sound like a Weasley answer. It depends on what you mean by the word I. I is a word, it's a name. What sense does that name have when you're saying it? If the sense of I, the word I, is some idea you have in your head of yourself, then it exists, but it exists as an idea inside your head. If what you mean by I is the person talking, that exists if and only if it's true that someone is talking. So if that sense has a real referent. And if by I you mean Kant's idea of transcendental subjectivity, then we're going to have to say a little bit more later. But because that's actually what this sort of boils down to at a certain level. But yeah, so I hope that at least it depends entirely on what you mean by I. All right, and there was a hand up I saw.
Yeah, that was me.
Okay, go ahead. There might have been another person too, but go ahead.
Oh, it might have been.
Well, you can go first at least. Your hand was up. Yeah, yours was up too.
Okay, so how how does Frege say something can be not perceivable but still be discoverable?
So here's an obvious answer to that question, and then there's a more subtle, nuanced answer that we'll need to do. Is the Pythagorean theorem perceivable? Like, do you perceive the Pythagorean theorem?
Okay, I see. So, like, yes, I mean,
maybe
in a sense, you do.
Yeah, maybe, but not in the normal sense that we mean when we say perceive something, anyway.
Okay, I see.
You don't perceive it like you perceive a tree.
Right. Okay.
Indeed, it's going to turn out that you don't even perceive a tree like that on Frege's account. But what he's basically going to say is that, like, we're far too fast and loose about how perception actually works. But we immediately start with a more intuitive example of the Pythagorean theorem anyway. Yeah, like, you at the very least don't perceive that in any normal sense of the word perceive. And yet it obviously could be discovered to be true.
Okay.
That works?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's
all right. Good. And we're going to return to that point, so don't worry. We'll get back to it. And then cool. I think the other hand looks like it was Michaela, so go ahead. I don't know if you're saying anything, but you're
sorry.
Oh, there it is. That's working. That's working.
Yeah, okay. It doesn't work when I have my headphones plugged in. But anyways, I'm doing a really big paper on Spinoza right now and for my capstone, and it kind of reminds me of Spinoza's idea, or Spinoza's take on, like, adequate ideas, and that it seems to be like there is a truth, like, for him it's reason, but there is a truth that's just kind of floating out there in the world, and we can all perceive, or we can all grasp it, like, in the exact same way. Like, it has to be shareable, and it's there regardless of whether or not we understand it.
That is correct. Here is the difference. Everything you said up to this point is right. The difference between really all of the early modern sort of idealists, you might, and what Frege is saying, is that thoughts are not ideas.
Right.
And they
I did pick up on that.
And what Spinoza says I mean, he means something weird by God, but he says, like, they're in God. So they're not actually floating nowhere. They are somewhere in Spinoza. They're in God.
Yeah, they're, like, in God's mind, which is also just like the world, kind of.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so at the very least, Frege is going to say, if they're in God's mind, they're ideas, therefore they're purely subjective. Therefore, we human beings couldn't have access to them anyway.
Okay, right. That makes sense.
So that's this last point. They don't have to be thought by anyone, including God.
Cool.
And he does say, and maybe the idealists are right? Like, and even the German idealists, maybe they're all right, and maybe it's true that everything is just an idea in the mind of God, but that's so outside the scope of any human experience that it's not clear that has any, that can or should have anything to do with what we're saying metaphysically or in our philosophy of language.
Yeah, I noted that little, like, blurb in the text where he says that, because I thought it was just a fun little aside, like a fun little way to just disregard all of that and be like, that doesn't really pertain to what we're talking about. Yeah,
and he's not even denying it. Like, he's not saying that it's not true even.
Yeah, I noticed that.
It's just literally not what we are, and I think he sort of has a case here. It's just literally not what we were talking about. We're talking about the ability of humans to say the Pythagorean theorem. Whether the Pythagorean theorem does or does not exist in God's mind is sort of irrelevant.
Yeah, I definitely thought it was a smart move.
Yeah, go ahead. I missed the last thing.
No, I'm sorry. I was just saying that I thought it was a smart move to not go into that, because that would have just taken the whole piece into a completely different direction that it did not need to go in.
Yeah, or at least it might eventually have to go there. But yeah, you'd at the very least want to get really clear about all the stuff he's saying first.
Yeah.
Because the one puzzle we're left with at the end is there a causal relationship between thoughts and the empirical world?
Yeah.
And that's why Spinoza would introduce the mind of God, or why Plato has the theory of the forms, where the forms are causal agents as well, or Hegel has ideas as being causal in his system. And Frege's just not going there. He never once in this piece talks about how thoughts are related to ideas and why they're not the same thing. He never really talks about the relationship between thoughts and objects in the world. Besides saying they're not the same thing. They're not the same thing, but they seemingly need to be related in some way. And that's the thing he's not going to have anything to say about.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Was there anyone else that I have not gotten to yet? All right. So let's start with the truth one first. We can do the truth stuff a little bit faster. Basically, the one of these that his main target is correspondence. And the problem with all the other ones is going to be basically problems with different ways of understanding different kinds of correspondence. The problem with correspondence is that what is in the mind? Ideas. What is in language? Conventional linguistic units. And they just literally don't correspond to objects in the world at all, as far as he's concerned. This is actually the same thing that James says in the course of arguing for his pragmatic definition of truth. But Frege thinks this is a way more catastrophic critique. Nietzsche also says it as well. Frege thinks this is a way more catastrophic critique, maybe more like Nietzsche thinks it is. When ideas, by their very nature, don't have any of the properties sensible things have. So here's the example he gives of this. My idea of a shell that weighs 100 kilograms does not weigh 100 kilograms. It also doesn't have my idea of a shell does not have the same shape as a shell, because my ideas don't have shapes. It doesn't have a size. It doesn't have a texture. My idea might include the idea of a size, the idea of a texture, the idea of a weight, but those things are not sizes, weights, textures. If it was the case that the idea in my mind of the shell weighed 100 kilograms, then now there's a 100 kilogram thing inside my brain and I'd fall to the floor or something. There is no meaningful sense in which things in the mind can be said to correspond with things in the world. They share no properties in common. And linguistic things, same thing, linguistic things are purely conventional. Right? The sound shell, or the word shell, again, has nothing in common with the object of a shell. The sound doesn't weigh 100 kilograms. The sound doesn't have such and such a texture, yada, yada, yada. The only linkage that there is at all is because of the conventional structure of the language, and the objective world is not conventional. The objective world is objective. Okay? So there cannot be a correspondence with any of these things, including with between the idea of the useful and things in the world, and with the idea of coherence and things in the world. So things in the world are things in the world. They're not useful or coherent. All right. So someone is asking, could we consider, therefore, truth to be kind of like a relational kind of idea between the shapes and the idea? And Frege is going to say no, because it's not clear why we would care about that relationship. So maybe we could, that's such a thing, right? So yeah, let me try to make that question clear to everyone else. So let's say we said something like this. What we said, okay, sure. So my idea of the shell, it doesn't have a particular shape, and the shell does have a particular shape. Fine. But maybe my idea of the shape of the shell, maybe that idea, like, it sort of like reflects or is like an image of it in some sense. And so maybe we can define truth as kind of this, like, a certain kind of relationship between the content of the idea and the content of the world. The reason Frege is going to reject that is that that doesn't match up with what we call by truth or false. When I say it's true that the shell weighs 100 kilograms, I'm not talking about your mind. And I'm not talking about anything about your mind. If it was a genuinely relational predicate or a relational quality, I would have to be talking about both your mind and the object, but that's just not true. You can believe whatever you want about the shell. If it's true to say that it weighs 100 kilograms, it weighs 100 kilograms. Even if every human being was dead, it would still weigh 100 kilograms. So I hope that responded to that question. So then and since someone else is asking in the chat, does this mean that things in the world can be said to be real or not real? Yes, that's exactly right. Things in the world are or exist or are real, but they're not true or false. Actually, they're just that's not the right way of talking about them, just like it's not the right way of talking about the ideas either. So what does that leave truth as? It leaves truth as a kind of way of affirming a thought. Because that's at root what this objection boils down to. What is true? Thoughts. Thoughts are true. At least they're true if they're asserted in the context where truth is relevant, right? So if I was, and maybe if I'm in a play and I say, I am the king of France, that doesn't actually have a truth value. But if I'm asserting that as true, then it's true. Truth is a feature of certain kinds of thoughts. The way he characterizes this, so I'm going to start erasing some stuff. The way he characterizes this, think of the order almost as this. When a question occurs, that is a thought. All right, so is the shell 100 kilograms? That is the thought. The thought calls for an answer. And the answer is true or false. Okay. Which is to say, the answer is it weighs 100 kilograms. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Right? You say yes or no to the it weighs 100 kilograms. This is important to him that the question is basically a declarative sentence, just with the verb order changed. Right? So is the shell 100 pounds? The answer to that is the shell is weighed 100 kilograms. And then that answer is either true or false. All right. And then this implies an assertion. Which is when I actually say the sentence. Assertion, we're in language territory here. This shell weighs 100 kilograms. And either out loud or to myself or whatever. Not all sentences are actually making assertions. That's what's going on in the play. In the play, I'm not making an actual assertion. I'm just saying a sentence with a sentence. But every time I'm asserting something, I am answering a sort of a question. Right. So let's go to the chat real fast. So someone asked in the chat, is there a difference between truth and facts? There is not a difference for what we're going to talk about. If we were to go really deep into it, there's a slight difference, but for our purposes, no, truth and facts mean this. Or let me say this way. Truth is always, actually, no, I'm going to answer that question differently. That's a good question. That's actually worth going into. What is a fact? A fact is a true thought. That is what a fact is. A fact is a true thought. So any true thought is a fact. And so that is the sense in which they are different. Because there are some thoughts that are false, and there are some thoughts that just don't pertain to truth. Things that aren't actually being asserted. How are we doing so far? Is this okay? This movement? Is this an okay movement so far?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why? You might be about to explain it, but like, why does it only sometimes call for assertion?
Because sometimes because basically the sense of a sentence just doesn't actually have to involve ever actually giving an answer. So a sentence that said, maybe if I'm lying, for example, where I know what I'm saying is false, even still, I can still say it as if it was true because the sentence still has a sense.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, or like when I'm acting on stage, right? When I'm acting on stage, I'm not really claiming I'm the king of France, but I'm claiming that the sentence "I am the king of France" has a certain kind of sense that like has emotional effects on the audience, maybe. And so that's why I'm uttering it. I'm not uttering it because I'm saying it's the answer to the question, am I the king of France? Good. There's a, let's see, I think Weston had a question, so go ahead.
I have a question as to like, what about those, like, I'm trying not to get too linguistic, but like those like thoughts that like come into your mind without ever really actually thinking about it or like doing it or like, you know, like not even involved with it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like I'm trying to do an example, but I can't really like.
That's what's going to make this so frustrating is it's going to be so hard to do an example.
Yeah,
so
like trying not to sound crazy, but like, what if I just get a random thought that says like, go plant a tree in the Rocky Mountains behind
that
the
is an idea, not a thought. That's what's going to make this so frustrating. What you just described is not properly speaking a thought. It's
even if it just like occurs into my mind without me ever like writing anything down or
no, it's precisely because it occurred in your mind.
Okay.
That it is an idea, not a thought.
Okay.
That is actually why it is an idea and not a thought. So let's turn. That is indeed the next place to go. So let's turn here. The central thing that he thinks people are going to be worried about or object to is he thinks people are going to be object and say, wait a second, aren't thoughts just ideas? That's the central objection. That's the objection he's the most concerned with, and it's the confusion he thinks people are going to most have with what it is that he's saying. They're going to keep making this parts of our mind rather than parts of, well, not the world either, but not a third thing. They're going to make thoughts either the world or they're going to make thoughts the mind. Why would you be tempted to think this? Well, it seems like thoughts seem to be things that are in our minds, right? And the answer is no. Actually, the answer is thoughts can't occur within minds because they would be subjective if they were. And so as a result, just like ideas can never be shared, thoughts could never be shared either if they were features of your mind, right? Now, you can have an idea in your mind that's you thinking, your mind imagining something to correspond with a thought you've had. So when I say triangle, right, or maybe this way, when I say there are 3 kinds of triangles, when I say that, something popped into all of your heads. Even if it was, I hate math, something popped into your heads for all of you when I said there are 3 kinds of triangles. Maybe you imagined the 3 kinds of triangles. Maybe you thought, I hate math. Or thoughts again. Maybe you said the words inside of your head, I hate math. Maybe you like held a shape in your hand. Maybe you have a tactile sense that you used. Let's just say we all pictured 3 different triangles, isosceles, scalene, and equilateral. And say we all pictured, just tried to imagine what an example of each of those 3 triangles. What we have imagined have no common. The 3 triangles that I have imagined are nothing like the 3 triangles that you're imagined. And indeed, it's not even possible to compare them. That's actually the key idea here. Because there would have to be some other consciousness that's not your mind or my mind in which we held them together. And that third mind, they would just be then ideas of that third mind. a telepath's not going to help, because when a telepath reads my mind and compares my thoughts, quote unquote, to their thoughts or their ideas, they're not really doing that. They're looking at their idea of my ideas or their perception of my ideas, which aren't in my mind anymore. Now it's in their minds. What's inside your mind is entirely isolated. It's entirely only exists in reference to your mind. And it's nothing outside of it. That is why what he is calling a thought is not an idea. It's not a feature of your mind. It's got to be a feature of something else, if it's the case that human beings can do things like science. If we can do any kind of shared project together, thoughts are not ideas. Ideas are private. Thoughts are what are shared. And then, this is where we're running low on time. So I'll do a poll at the end and see if you actually want to do an extra session next week. But this is where he then starts turning into considering all these sort of like possible counterexamples, like what if there are no other human beings besides me? What if everything just is my idea and there are no other people or anything like that? Or what if everything is just brain impulses, so everything is just objects in the world? What about then? And where he basically uses Kant actually to show that none of those can be right, that all of those are internally inconsistent, and therefore there must be some third thing that you can, some third thing different from both the world and objects. We've got like 2 minutes left or so for today, so maybe let's pause it here for now. Does anyone have any questions based on just where we are now? Michaela, go ahead.
I never unraised my hand. I apologize.
That is fine. Don't worry about it.
Could you bring your screen back up so I can just get that last little bit at the bottom
absolutely.
of that?
I can bring it back up.
I guess I kind of have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is all only true if science is possible. Is that
That's right.
fair? Okay.
At least as we have presented it up to this point, he has not argued that science is possible. Yes, that's right.
Okay.
He goes on to, but everything I've said up to this point is conditional upon science being a real thing. Yeah. And if you want me to go back, Jonathan, just let me know.
Nope, I got it. Thank you. I was just about to unmute my mic to tell you that.
Okay, good. All right. So, do you all want to spend some more time on this? Because I would love to. I think this is one of the coolest things I've read in forever, like I said. But also, we're at the end of the semester, and you all got shit on your plate. So, do we want to spend one more day?
I'm down. I love this shit. Very interesting.
Okay. I'm getting thumbs up. I'm assuming thumbs up are yes, I'm for it. We will hold the session next time. You can probably do most of the question for Frege without really worrying about it. But on Monday, let's do one more day on Frege. Then we'll try to actually get into his refutation of the materialists and the idealists, and to establish that science is possible, that at the very least, your mind exists. And that probably suggests that other people's minds exist too. And so therefore thoughts have to be everything that he's saying that they are. So that's what we'll do next time. We had one last chat question, or maybe we'll have time for one more.
I could say it real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
So like if two people independently discover a thought, right? Like across the world, right?
Yeah.
Never spoke, never talk.
Mhm.
And then does that like help us like as humans to like accept it as like quote unquote true?
Yeah, at least as an empirical matter, like that might, because the danger is going to be that what I think is my brilliant thought actually is almost polluted by language in various sorts of ways. So I might think when I say the Pythagorean theorem and I say it's that a squared plus b squared equals c squared, that I think that has something to do with the maybe say the style of mathematics that we do in the United States, and that the way mathematics was done in ancient Greece, where they never would have written any of those symbols down, that they therefore didn't know the Pythagorean theorem, right? Because what matters isn't the way we express the Pythagorean theorem as a squared plus b squared equals c squared. What matters is what that means, the thought that that equation expresses. And yeah, if expressed in different words, that same thought gets expressed somewhere in some other culture with some other language. That could at least give us practically some confidence that, yeah, it's not just a feature of our language or something, or not getting tricked by something about our language. You really are getting at the thought underlying the expression.
But we have to. I have to go to my next class.
We're done time-wise, so obviously everyone feel free to go. We're good for now. We'll have 2 meetings next week, one on Monday when we finish up Frege, and then one sort of like end of semester one where we meet on Wednesday. There'll be no new readings, no daily assignments.
Dope. I was just letting you know that the philosophy and religion class is way out of my schedule, so I won't be able to take it next semester.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but I entirely understand.
And then I guess my second question was more towards like Rowan and Jonathan. Do you know if we have
He just put a link up.
God damn it. I was kind of hoping he'd cancel. Okay. Well, Auf Wiedersehen. Have a good afternoon.
Yep. I'll see everyone on Monday.
Yeah, have a good one. Good weekend, everyone.
Yep. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You have a good one.
Thanks, you too.